The universe has a strict food chain, and humanity was widely expected to be near the bottom. So, when the Galactic Coalition captured a world-eating apex predator, they expected a bloodbath. They didn't expect a scarred xenobiologist from Earth to walk into its cage, unarmed, and bring a god of death to its knees. Deep within the cavernous bowels of Outpost Erebus, a black site facility jointly operated by the Galactic Coalition and the United Nations Space Command, the air hummed with a violent electric tension. The facility was an architectural marvel, a brutalist fortress of reinforced diamondoid glass and heavy-duty titanium built onto a rogue asteroid, spinning in the dark void between star systems. It had been constructed for one singular purpose: containment. Dr. Harrison Vane stood on the observation deck, his breath fogging the hyper-chilled glass. Below him lay the primary containment pit, a sprawling chamber that looked less like a scientific enclosure and more like a gladiatorial arena. The walls were lined with automated plasma turrets, heavily modified variants of the Phalanx CIWS systems originally developed by Lockheed Martin, upgraded with Coalition energy cores. Flanking the blast doors were heavily armored androids built on Boston Dynamics chassis, carrying enough firepower to level a small city. And yet, looking down into the pit, Harrison felt that none of it was enough. In the center of the chamber, paced the beast. The Coalition called it the Voracrim, a name that roughly translated to the end of all things in the Solari tongue. It was a nightmare rendered in flesh and carbon silicate armor. Standing 8 feet tall at the shoulder, the creature possessed the lithe, terrifying grace of a terrestrial panther, but scaled up to vehicular proportions. Its hide was a matrix of obsidian scales that absorbed the harsh artificial light, making it look like a void moving within the shadows. 6 powerful limbs ended in scythe-like talons that gouged deep furrows into the hardened durasteel floor with every restless step. A crown of bioluminescent spines ran down its spine, currently pulsing with an angry, radioactive crimson. "It hasn't slept in 14 cycles," a voice noted from the shadows behind Harrison. Harrison didn't turn around. He recognized the heavy, metallic, synthesized voice of Director William Stanford, the human liaison to the Coalition's Xenobiology Division. Stanford was a company man, a former DARPA executive who viewed the universe entirely through the lens of weaponization and threat matrices. "It's not sleeping because you're torturing it, William," Harrison said, his voice flat, his pale eyes never leaving the pacing Leviathan. Stanford stepped into the pale light of the observation deck. He was flanked by High Commander Viel, an alien of the avian-descended Solari race, whose plumage was ruffled in a perpetual state of aristocratic agitation. "Dr. Vane," Viel chirped, the translation matrix at his collar, smoothing the harsh clicks of his native language into clipped English, "your empathy is misplaced. The Voracrim destroyed the colony on Aegis Prime. It slaughtered 3 of our best telepathic handlers yesterday when we attempted a neural link pacification. It is an engine of pure violence. We brought you here because human records indicate your species has an unnatural history of successfully bonding with apex predators." "We domesticated wolves, High Commander," Harrison replied, finally turning away from the glass. He crossed his arms over his faded Oxford University sweater, a stark contrast to the sterile military uniforms around him. "We didn't blast them with high-frequency magnetic tethers and expect them to roll over and fetch." Harrison pointed a finger at the readouts flickering on the tactical displays mounted along the observation deck walls. "Look at the telemetry. The atmospheric pressure in that room is kept artificially high. The magnetic containment fields are pulsing at a frequency of 40 kilohertz. To a creature with a centralized nervous system designed for the absolute silence of deep jungle canopy worlds, that frequency isn't just an invisible fence. It's a physiological drill boring into its skull 24 hours a day." Stanford scowled, tapping a finger against his datapad. "The magnetic tethers are standard Coalition protocol for class 9 biohazards. If we drop the fields, it will tear through those blast doors." "If you don't drop the fields," Harrison countered, his voice rising, "its adrenal glands are going to rupture from sustained stress, and you won't have a specimen left to study. You brought me halfway across the Orion Spur because your telepaths keep getting their minds shattered when they try to link with it. Do you know why?" Vale tilted his avian head. "Because its mind is chaotic. It knows only slaughter." "Because it's in agonizing, unending pain," Harrison snapped. "Your telepaths aren't reading a desire to kill. They're experiencing the psychic backwash of an animal that is essentially being burned alive by your security measures." And when an apex predator is cornered and in pain, it doesn't negotiate. It eradicates. Harrison turned back to the glass. The Voracrim had stopped pacing. It lifted its massive armored head, its 4 eyes burning like dying embers, locking directly onto the observation deck. It couldn't possibly see them through the one-way diamondoid glass, but Harrison felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The beast knew they were there. It could feel their vibrations. "I need access to the lower levels," Harrison said quietly. "I need the unedited footage of Aegis Prime, and I need complete control over the environmental systems in Containment Sector 4. Stanford let out a harsh laugh. "Out of the question, Harrison. The UN Security Council barely approved your civilian clearance. I am not handing over the keys to a cage holding a beast that wiped out a battalion of Coalition Vanguard." "Then you're going to fail," Harrison said, stepping into Stanford's personal space. The xenobiologist was not a large man, but the intensity in his eyes, honed by years studying apex predators in the radioactive dead zones of Earth and the untamed jungles of Proxima Centauri, made the former DARPA director take a half step back. "You called me because humanity is the only species in this coalition that evolved as persistence hunters. We know how to track, we know how to break, and we know how to heal. Give me the footage. Let me do my job, or I'll be on the next SpaceX transport back to Earth, and you can explain to the coalition why their multi-trillion credit prize died of a stress-induced aneurysm." Stanford held Harrison's gaze for a long, heavy moment before scoffing. He keyed his comms. "Command, grant Dr. Vane access to the Aegis Prime archives. And God help you if you trigger a containment breach, Harrison." For the next 48 hours, Harrison did not sleep. He locked himself in a dimly lit sub-level laboratory, surrounding himself with holographic displays projecting the chaotic, blood-soaked footage of the Aegis Prime incident. Aegis Prime had been a lush agricultural colony. The footage from the security drones showed a massacre. The Voracrim had moved like a blur of shadow and razor wire, tearing through reinforced armored vehicles and decimating the colonial militia with terrifying efficiency. The Solari military tribunals had labeled it an unprovoked biological attack. But as Harrison slowed the footage down, frame by agonizing frame, utilizing an advanced behavioral analysis algorithm originally developed by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to track microexpressions, a different narrative began to emerge. He watched a clip where a heavily armed militia squad cornered the beast near a colony reactor core. The Voracrim roared, an ear-splitting sound that shattered the audio receptors of the drones. But before it charged, Harrison noticed a subtle shift in its posture. Its bioluminescent spines flared blue, not the angry red of the containment cell, but a sharp, icy blue. Its front limbs splayed outward. Its weight shifted back. It wasn't attacking, Harrison realized, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was posturing. It was warning them to back away. He cross-referenced the tactical data. In every instance of violence, the colonists had fired first. The Voracrim had only retaliated when the colonists' plasma weaponry had breached its critical distance. It wasn't a mindless killer hunting for sport. It was a displaced, highly intelligent creature defending what it perceived as its territory from an aggressive swarm. But there was something else. A profound, heartbreaking detail hidden in the biometric scan. Harrison zoomed in on a specific frame from the drone footage just before the beast was captured by the Coalition's stasis net. Beneath the creature's armored underbelly, partially obscured by the smoke and plasma fire, was a deep, jagged scar. It was an old wound, perfectly circular, the kind left by a high-yield industrial mining laser. The beast hadn't just wandered onto Aegis Prime. It had been driven there. Its native habitat had been destroyed, likely by illegal corporate strip mining operations that the Coalition actively ignored. Harrison leaned back in his chair, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "You're just a refugee," he whispered to the frozen hologram of the terrifying monster. "A battered, starving refugee that didn't know how to ask for help, so you did the only thing you knew how to do. You fought." The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The advanced telepathic alien races of the Coalition couldn't communicate with the Voracrim because their telepathy was based on complex linguistic structures and higher-order logic. They were trying to speak poetry to a creature that only spoke the language of survival. Humanity, however, understood survival. Humanity understood the deep, limbic resonance of trauma. Harrison pulled up his terminal and initiated a priority override code. He drafted a deeply risky psychological framework, drawing upon archaic polyvagal theory and behavioral conditioning models from the early 21st century. He bypassed Stanford's authorization entirely, using a backdoor he'd retained from his old consulting days with the military. He didn't just need to talk to the beast, he needed to prove he wasn't a threat. And to do that, he had to strip away every advantage the coalition relied on. 10 minutes later, the klaxons in Outpost Erebus began to wail. Warning. Containment Sector 4, environmental protocols overridden. Magnetic tethers deactivating. Thermal suppression deactivating. The automated facility voice echoed coldly through the corridors. In the central command hub, Director Stanford spilled his coffee across a holographic star map, his face draining of color. What the hell is going on? System override? Who gave that order? Director! A frantic technician shouted from the sensor pit. It's Dr. Vane. He's locked us out of the primary console. The magnetic fields in the pit are dropping to 0. He's going to get us all killed! High Commander Vielle shrieked, his feathers puffing up in sheer panic. Deploy the Boston Dynamics kill squads! Flood the chamber with neurotoxin! I can't! The technician yelled, frantically typing. Vane has hard-locked the armory protocols. The internal defense grid is offline. And... Sir, the inner blast door to the pit is cycling open. Doctor, Vane is in the airlock. Stanford stared at the live feed from the containment chamber, absolute horror gripping his chest. That arrogant son of a bitch. He's committing suicide. The heavy titanium blast door hissed, the pneumatic seals breaking with a loud metallic groan. Harrison stepped into the containment pit. The immediate shift in atmosphere hit him like a physical wall. Without the thermal suppressors, the ambient heat radiating from the Voracrim's massive body spiked the room's temperature to a sweltering degree. The air smelled of ozone, copper, and something deeply primal, the scent of an apex predator that had bathed in the blood of hundreds. Harrison stood completely still. He wore no body armor, no kinetic shielding. He carried no weapon. He was clad only in his gray sweater, a pair of dark slacks, and the heavy boots that grounded him to the durasteel floor. 50 yards away, the Voracrim froze. The sudden absence of the agonizing magnetic field seemed to confuse the beast for a fraction of a second. Its bioluminescent spines flickered rapidly between a disoriented yellow and an aggressive blood red. Slowly, its massive head swiveled toward the tiny, fragile, two-legged creature that had just walked into its domain. A low rumble began to vibrate through the floor plates, a sound so deep, Harrison felt it in his teeth rather than heard it. It was a predatory purr, an engine of violence spooling up. Don't run, Harrison thought, forcing his heart rate to remain steady. If you run, you're prey. If you freeze, you're a target. The Voracrim turned fully toward him. It lowered its massive front shoulders, its scythe-like talons flexing and sparking against the metal floor. It let out a deafening, concussive roar that sent a shockwave of displaced air crashing into Harrison, tearing at his clothes and making his ears ring with a high-pitched whine. Up in the observation deck, invisible behind the glass, Stanford slammed his fists against the console. Get him out of there! Blow the glass if you have to! We cannot breach the glass without venting the entire sector to space. Director, the technician screamed back. He's on his own. In the pit, the beast charged. It moved with a terrifying liquid speed, crossing the distance in massive, leaping bounds. The durasteel floor shook beneath its weight. A creature of that size shouldn't have been able to move that fast. It was an avalanche of black scales and razor-sharp bone closing in to eradicate the intruder. 30 yards. 20 yards. 10. Harrison didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon that wasn't there. Instead, drawing upon a deep, primal instinct buried in the human genome, he did the exact opposite of what the alien telepaths had done. He didn't try to project dominance. He didn't try to force his will into the beast's mind. He dropped to his knees. It was a sharp, deliberate movement. He hit the cold floor, bowed his head, and exposed the fragile, unprotected nape of his neck. He spread his arms out to his sides, palms open, rendering himself entirely, utterly defenseless. He projected a single, profound emotion outward, not through telepathy, but through the universal language of body mechanics. I yield. I am not your enemy. I understand your pain. The Voracrim hit the brakes. The kinetic force of the beast's sudden stop sent a wave of dust and loose debris washing over Harrison. The creature skidded to a halt mere inches from Harrison's kneeling form. The air was suddenly suffocatingly hot, the beast's ragged, heavy breathing blowing over Harrison like the exhaust of a jet turbine. Harrison kept his eyes fixed on the floor. He could see the beast's massive talons, each one the size of a human torso, hovering just millimeters from his hands. One twitch, one reflex, and Harrison would be instantly eviscerated. For agonizing seconds, the pit was dead silent, save for the creature's heavy respiration. Slowly, Harrison raised his head. He looked directly into the creature's 4 burning eyes. Up close, the beast was even more terrifying, an intricate mosaic of scars, armored plating, and raw, unrestrained power. But looking into those eyes, Harrison didn't see a mindless killer. He saw exhaustion. He saw the profound, crushing loneliness of a creature that had been hunted to the edge of the galaxy. Harrison slowly reached out a trembling hand. Up in the observation deck, Vial gasped, holding his breath, waiting for the inevitable spray of human blood. Harrison's hand hovered in the air, palm open, a few inches from the creature's massive, armored snout. He made a low clicking sound with his tongue, a subaudible frequency he had synthesized from the Aegis Prime footage, a sound that mimicked the distress call of a Vora Krim cub. "I know," Harrison whispered, his voice incredibly soft, yet carrying in the cavernous silence of the pit. "I know they hurt you. I know you're tired. It stops today. I promise you it stops today." The beast stared at the tiny human hand. Its bioluminescent spines, which had been flashing a violent red, slowly began to dim. The color shifted, cascading down its massive spine from red to an uncertain yellow, and finally settling into a soft, pulsing, oceanic blue. The Vorakrim let out a long, heavy exhale that smelled of ash. Then, in a movement that defied every xenobiological text written by the Galactic Coalition, the universe's most lethal apex predator closed the distance. It pressed its massive armored snout into the palm of Harrison's hand. The sheer weight of the creature's head forced Harrison's arm down, but the touch was incredibly gentle, a terrifying display of restraint. The beast closed its eyes, leaning into the touch of the first creature in a decade that hadn't tried to shoot it, cage it, or control it. Slowly, deliberately, the Vora Krim folded its front limbs. The heavy armored plates shifted with a metallic grinding sound. The Leviathan lowered its massive body down to the durasteel floor, bringing its head down to Harrison's eye level. It curled its enormous tail around itself, a defensive posture suddenly turning into one of profound vulnerability. The beast bowed. In the observation deck, absolute, stunned silence reigned. High Commander Vale's datapad slipped from his feathered grip, clattering uselessly to the floor. Director Stanford stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his mind utterly failing to process the impossible data before him. The most advanced militaries in the galaxy had thrown fleets, telepaths, and heavily armed armadas at this creature, only to be slaughtered. And a human, a soft, frail, unarmed human, had just tamed it with a whisper and an open hand. Down in the pit, Harrison gently stroked the rough, scaled armor above the beast's eyes. A heavy, rumbling purr began to vibrate through the floor again, but this time, it wasn't the spooling engine of violence. It was the sound of a weary god finally finding rest. "That's it," Harrison murmured, a tight, emotional smile breaking across his scarred face. "You're safe now. I've got you." Harrison looked up past the massive bulk of the resting predator, his eyes finding the one-way glass of the observation deck. He knew Stanford and Vale were watching. He knew the entire coalition was about to realize exactly why humanity had survived so long on a death world like Earth. Humans weren't just apex predators. They were the apex guardians. And as the galaxy's deadliest nightmare slept peacefully at his feet, Harrison Vane knew the universe was never going to be the same. The heavy, rhythmic breathing of the Vora Krim filled the cavernous containment pit, a sound that resonated like the idling engine of a heavy dreadnought. Harrison Vane remained kneeling on the cold durasteel floor, his hand resting gently against the creature's massive, armored snout. The bioluminescent spines running down the beast's back continued to pulse in a calming, oceanic blue, casting long, swaying shadows across the blast-scarred walls. Up close, the sheer scale of the creature was staggering. Each obsidian scale was thicker than a blast plate from a Boeing Starliner-class dropship. Yet the beast radiated a surprising, terrifying warmth. Harrison slowly adjusted his posture, ignoring the sharp ache in his knees. "I'm going to call you Atlas," he whispered, his voice deliberately kept at a low, even cadence. "Because you've been carrying the weight of an entire hostile universe on your shoulders." Atlas opened one of its 4 burning eyes, the fiery amber iris constricting as it focused on the tiny human. It let out a soft, chittering sound, a noise that completely contradicted its terrifying appearance, and nudged Harrison's shoulder with a gentleness that defied logic. Up in the observation deck, the stunned silence had shattered into a frantic, chaotic frenzy. Director William Stanford was practically hyperventilating, his face pale as he barked orders into his comms unit. High Commander Vale of the Solari was pacing erratically, his avian features twitching with a mixture of terror and wounded pride. "This is impossible!" Vale squawked, his translation matrix struggling to keep up with his rapid, panicked chirps. The Palantir predictive models guaranteed a 99% mortality rate for any unshielded biological entering that chamber. "The creature is a biological weapon. It does not purr." "Shut up, Vale!" Stanford hissed, his fingers flying across his holographic terminal. He had recovered from his initial shock, and the ruthless, pragmatic mind of a former DARPA executive was rapidly taking over. He wasn't looking at a miracle. He was looking at a massive, multi-trillion credit liability. We have a severe problem here. If the UN Security Council sees this footage, if they see that this monster is just a displaced animal that can be pacified with a pat on the head, our funding for the weaponization project evaporates overnight. Vale stopped pacing. "The weaponization project? Stanford, you assured the Coalition this black site was purely for xenobiological containment and defense research." "Don't be naive, Commander," Stanford snapped, his eyes fixed on the live feed of Harrison and the resting beast. "A biological asset that can single-handedly wipe out a Vanguard battalion? General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin have been salivating over the combat telemetry. We were going to extract its genetic sequence to breed autonomous, neural-linked shock troops. But we can't do that if some bleeding heart human from the Jane Goodall Institute proves the creature is sentient and peaceful." Stanford keyed his primary command console. "Security Team Alpha, this is the director. Dr. Vane has suffered a localized psychotic break and is currently trapped in the primary containment pit. The asset is temporarily docile but remains extremely lethal. I am authorizing a Palantir quantum decrypt override on Vane's lockdown codes." Down in the pit, Harrison felt the shift before he heard it. The ambient lighting, which had been set to a soft, neutral white, suddenly snapped to a harsh, glaring, tactical red. The pneumatic seals on the secondary air vents high above began to hiss ominously. Atlas reacted instantly. The massive beast's head snapped up, its 4 eyes dilating. The oceanic blue of its spines violently shifted back to an angry, radioactive crimson. The creature let out a low, warning growl, its heavy tail whipping back and forth and gouging deep trenches into the floor. "Easy, Atlas. Easy," Harrison murmured, keeping his hands visible and his voice steady. He quickly tapped the wrist-mounted terminal he wore beneath his sweater. He saw the network alerts flashing rapidly. Stanford was bypassing his security locks. "They're going to gas the room," Harrison realized with a sickening jolt of clarity. Harrison quickly calculated the volume of the room and the flow rate of the standard Coalition neurotoxin vents. To suppress an organism of Atlas's mass, they would need to flood the chamber with a highly concentrated, aerosolized Soman variant. Adapting the wave velocity to the dense atmospheric pressure, Harrison silently ran the acoustic equation $F equals frac V lambda $, to determine if he could use the facility's localized PA system to generate a counter-frequency to disrupt the gas. Deployment? But he knew he didn't have the hardware. He had to rely on a different tactic: exposure. Director Stanford, Harrison's voice suddenly echoed through the command hub's internal speakers, his wrist terminal overriding the local comms channel. "I know what you're doing. If you flood this chamber, you'll kill me." Stanford glared at the speakers. "Dr. Vane, you are in direct violation of Coalition protocol. You have compromised a Class 9 biohazard facility. The gas is a non-lethal paralytic meant to secure the asset." "You're lying," Harrison shot back, his voice echoing coldly. Your standard paralytics don't work on the Vora Crim's accelerated metabolism. You're switching to a lethal binary agent. You'd rather kill us both and claim it was an accident than let the galaxy know the truth about Aegis Prime. The truth is that the beast slaughtered innocents, Viel shouted defensively. The truth, Harrison yelled. Standing up slowly and keeping one hand on Atlas's armored flank to keep the beast grounded, is that Aegis Prime wasn't just an agricultural colony. I decrypted the deep-level planetary scans. Beneath the topsoil, the crust is laced with refined neodymium. The Rio Tinto off-world extraction arm has been running illegal, unsanctioned deep-core mining operations on the planet for 5 years. The color completely drained from Stanford's face. They destroyed this creature's native habitat, Harrison continued, his voice ringing with righteous fury. They drove it into the colony sectors to force the Coalition Vanguard to exterminate it, neatly removing the apex predator that was disrupting their illegal strip mining. And you, Stanford, have been covering it up because your DARPA buddies want the combat data. In the command hub, the technicians stopped typing, turning to look at the director in stunned horror. "Shut off his comms!" Stanford roared, drawing his sidearm and pointing it at the lead technician. "I said shut him up and flood the chamber, now!" The vents hissed, and a thick, sickly yellow fog began to billow from the ceiling grates. Down in the pit, Atlas roared. It wasn't a roar of aggression, but of panic. The beast recognized the smell of the chemical agents that had been used to torture it for weeks. It began to thrash, its massive claws tearing chunks of durasteel from the floor. "Atlas, look at me!" Harrison shouted, coughing as the first tendrils of the toxic gas drifted down. "Stay with me." The beast whipped its head around. Seeing the fragile human coughing and dropping to one knee, a sudden, miraculous shift occurred in the creature's demeanor. The panic vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, protective instinct. Atlas lunged forward, using its massive, 8-foot-tall body as a physical shield. It curled entirely around Harrison, creating a localized dome of carbon silicate armor. The beast then flared its bioluminescent spines, generating a localized, high-intensity thermal updraft that violently pushed the heavy chemical gas upward, away from the trapped human. Harrison huddled beneath the beast's massive ribcage, staring in absolute awe at the armored scales protecting him. The galaxy's deadliest predator was suffocating itself to act as a living shield for a human it had known for less than an hour. "I won't let you die," Harrison choked out, tears streaming down his face from the acrid fumes. He pulled out his wrist terminal, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. He didn't just bypass Stanford's local network, he tapped into the Coalition's deep space relay buoys. Using a heavily encrypted backdoor he had designed years ago for the United Nations Oversight Committee, Harrison established a direct, unblockable uplink. He didn't just call for help. He broadcasted everything. The security footage of the Rio Tinto mining lasers destroying the jungle. The biometric data proving the Vora Crim was a displaced, grieving animal. The audio logs of Stanford authorizing the lethal gas. And, most importantly, the live, high-definition feed of the terrifying, world-eating monster currently acting as a gentle, self-sacrificing shield for a frail human. He beamed the data packet across the Sol system, to Earth, to the Solari homeworld, to every major news network, military tribunal, and civilian data hub in the Orion Spur. "Let's see them cover this up," Harrison whispered, before the lack of oxygen finally dragged him into darkness. When Harrison finally opened his eyes, the world was a blurry, sterile white. The rhythmic beeping of a medical monitor echoed softly in his ears. He was lying on a biobed, a specialized oxygen mask strapped tightly over his face. He bolted upright, his heart rate spiking, wildly tearing the plastic mask away. "Atlas!" he shouted, his throat raw and burning. "Easy, Dr. Vane." A calm, authoritative voice commanded from the edge of the room. "Just breathe." Harrison blinked rapidly, his vision slowly clearing under the harsh fluorescent lights. Standing at the foot of his bed was not Director William Stanford, but a tall, imposing woman in the dark blue uniform of a United Nations fleet admiral. The silver stars on her collar gleamed brightly. Beside her stood a pair of heavily armed UN Marines, their armor a stark contrast to the Coalition Vanguard. "Admiral Hayes," Harrison gasped, recognizing the Supreme Commander of the Earth Defense Fleet. "The Vora Crim. Where is it? Did they kill him?" Admiral Hayes offered a small, deeply reassuring smile. She reached forward and tapped a silver button on the wall. The opaque medical privacy glass separating the room from the main bay instantly turned transparent. Harrison gasped aloud. Through the thick glass, he could see the massive, open-air hangar of a UN dreadnought, resting peacefully in the exact center of the vast hangar, surrounded not by magnetic tethers or plasma turrets, but by a ring of fascinated, cautiously optimistic human engineers and xenobiologists, was Atlas. The giant beast was completely awake. Its bioluminescent spines were glowing a steady, contented, oceanic blue. As Harrison pressed his bare hand directly against the cold glass, the creature lifted its massive armored head. Its 4 burning eyes locked instantly onto his small form. It let out a soft, booming chitter that physically rattled the medical bay windows. "We extracted you both exactly 3 hours ago," Admiral Hayes explained, stepping up directly beside him to watch the Titan. "Your rogue broadcast caused an unprecedented diplomatic firestorm, Harrison." The raw footage went viral on a galactic scale within mere minutes. The Solari High Council was so utterly horrified by the sheer revelation of the illegal Rio Tinto corporate cover-up that they completely withdrew their active support for the Erebus Black Site immediately. "What about Stanford?" Harrison asked, his voice rough. "Director Stanford is currently sitting in federal custody," Hayes replied coldly. "He is actively awaiting a military trial for extreme crimes against the Coalition, the illegal weaponization of a sentient species, and the attempted premeditated murder of a United Nations operative." The United Nations Security Council urgently convened an emergency session. "Thanks strictly to your downloaded data, the Voracrim is officially no longer classified as a Class 9 biohazard, or a mindless monster." Harrison let out an incredibly long, shuddering breath of pure relief, leaning his weary body heavily against the reinforced glass. "What happens now?" he whispered. "We absolutely cannot put him back on Aegis Prime. That entire native ecosystem is completely devastated beyond repair." "No, we definitely cannot," Hayes agreed softly, which is precisely why the UN has formally petitioned the entire Galactic Coalition to permanently grant humanity exclusive legal guardianship over the entire surviving Voracrim species. We have successfully secured a sprawling, totally uninhabited jungle world deep within the Sirius sector. It is a perfect, isolated sanctuary. Rio Tinto's highly lucrative seized planetary assets are currently being fully liquidated to entirely fund the massive terraforming and orbital security of the new sanctuary planet. The Admiral turned slowly to look at Harrison, her stern expression entirely filled with a profound, undeniable respect. The Silari telepaths are honestly still in a deep state of collective shock. They simply could not understand how you actually did it. How a frail, ordinary human, without any latent psychic abilities whatsoever, managed to miraculously tame the galaxy's most untamable living nightmare. But we clearly know the truth, do we not, Dr. Vane? Harrison looked back lovingly at Atlas, closely watching as the massive, terrifying beast playfully nudged a very brave UN environmental engineer with its giant snout, nearly knocking the poor smiling woman completely over onto the deck. "We did not tame him, Admiral," Harrison said softly, a tired smile finally breaking across his face. "We just stopped treating him like a violent monster. Humanity has spent 10,000 years carefully turning wild wolves into loyal dogs, and bravely turning the wild, terrifying unknown into beloved companions. We do not seek to blindly dominate. We fiercely bond." Exactly 1 standard week later, Harrison Vane proudly stood on the lowered metal ramp of a heavy UN transport ship. The warm, comfortably humid morning air of the Sirius sanctuary world gently ruffled his dark hair. The beautiful planet was a vibrant, sprawling paradise composed of towering emerald canopies and rushing crystal-clear rivers. It was a pristine, untouched world entirely free from bloody war, greedy industry, or blinding fear. Behind him, the incredibly heavy, rhythmic thud of massive, armored footsteps violently shook the ship metal ramp. Atlas slowly emerged from the dark transport hold, confidently stepping out into the bright, natural yellow sunlight for the very first time in over a long, agonizing year. The gigantic beast took a remarkably deep breath, its armored chest expanding massively, and let out a tremendous, sky-shattering roar. But this specific roar did not fiercely shatter sensitive audio receptors. It did not deeply carry the tragic, heavy weight of senseless violence or unending trauma. It was a glorious, pure sound of absolute, unbridled, joyous freedom that endlessly echoed across the vast, rolling green valleys. Atlas quickly lowered its massive head, gently nudging Harrison backward, nearly pushing the fragile xenobiologist forward into the tall, swaying grass. Harrison laughed brightly, reaching back quickly to fiercely scratch the thick, obsidian-armored scales situated along the giant, enormous jawline. The universe was a dark, dangerous place. But humanity had brought empathy to the stars. If you loved this HFY story of humanity proving empathy is our greatest weapon, smash that like button. What would you name the galaxy's deadliest predator? Drop your ideas in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and subscribe to our channel for more epic tales of humans dominating the cosmos. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an adventure. Keep reaching for the stars, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, my name is Tran Truong, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, a human whispered to the galaxy's deadliest predator, and the beast bowed in respect. HFY, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the sense of wonder. Stories like this remind us that true strength isn't always about force or fear. Sometimes understanding, patience and courage can create connections where no one thought they were possible. One gentle lesson I took from this story is that respect often goes further than confrontation. In our everyday lives, taking the time to understand someone before judging them can completely change an outcome. What moment stood out to you the most? And why do you think the predator responded the way it did? Thank you for spending time with Palace Truths. If this story sparked your imagination or gave you something to think about, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe like or subscribe for more HFY stories and sci-fi adventures.